To create a web element object, you need to uniquely identify the element first. Locators are used to identify the elements on a web page that you want to interact with. Now take a look at this example. Here we have WebDriver.findElement method and you are specifying a locator. Okay, so what if this locator matches with multiple elements on the web page? In that case, this method driver.findElement can return the first element that is matched by the locator. So you cannot predict which one is matched, right? Because there are multiple elements matching with this locator. So it's super important that you specify a locator which can uniquely identify the element that you want to interact with. Now, take a different case. Suppose you want to get a list of elements matching your criteria specified as part of the locator. So for example, you want to get the list of all the button elements on the web page. So here you are specifying the locator by dot tag name as button. So any element matching with the tag name button, right? So we can use the method WebDriver.findElements and that will return all the web elements matching with the locator and you'll get a list of web element objects. Now let's take a look at some locator strategies. ID is the most efficient locator. If the HTML element that you are interested has an ID attribute, then you can use ID as your locator. The good thing about ID is that it's going to be unique. So if ID is present, then you can use that value in your locator. So you'll be writing code like driver.findElement by ID, then you'll use the same ID value here in your code. If the element that you want to identify has a name attribute, then you can use name as the locator. So you can write the code like driver.findElement by name and then you specify the value of the name attribute as the locator. Class name strategy locates elements by their class attribute. Suppose you have a web element where class attribute is present. In that case, you can write the code driver.findElement by class name and then the value of the class can be specified as the locator. Tag name locator locates elements by their HTML tag. Take this example. We have an HTML element input. Okay, so you can write the code driver.findElement by tag name and then you can use the HTML tag input here. Then it will locate the element based on the tag. The link text strategy locates a hyperlink by matching its exact text. Suppose you have a HTML element, a href, and then the URL and the link text. If you want to locate this element, you can write code driver.findElement by link text and then specifying the exact link text here as the login. Partial link text locating strategy locates hyperlinks by matching a part of its text. Suppose you have a hyperlink element with the link text as login. Okay, so you can use the locator by.partial link text and instead of specifying the complete link text, you can specify a part of the link text. Say for example, a log. CSS selector locates elements by using CSS syntax. So you will be using the locator by.css selector and specifying the CSS selector syntax. We'll be covering it later in detail. And we have another locator XPath. It uses an XPath syntax for locating the web elements. And you'll be using the method by.xpath for specifying the XPath. And we will dig into XPath at a later stage. Now let's take a look at some best practices in choosing the locators. So if ID is available for an element, then you can use it. Okay, so that's one of the best locator available. If there is no ID, you can go for name. CSS selector and XPath can be used if you have some complex scenarios to locate the elements. XPath is slower compared to CSS selectors. You can use link text and partial link text for any hyperlinks. Selenium 4 introduced some additional relative locators. So what it do is it locates elements related to the position of other elements. Suppose you have an element which doesn't have any unique attributes. In that case, what you can do is you can start with another element which has got some unique attribute and then based on the relative position of that element, you can identify the other element that you are interested in. Okay, so that means the relative locators identify elements based on their spatial relationship to other elements. There are 5 relative locators available: above of, below, to the left of, to the right of, and near. The above relative locator finds an element that is located above a specified element. So now take an example here. Suppose there is a web page with 5 buttons. There is a button with caption rough element in the middle, and there is another button with caption above, which is above this rough element, and another button below is below that. And on the left and right there are buttons like left and right. Okay, and now take a look at the HTML code. Okay, for all these buttons there are IDs present, and there are captions as well here. Okay, ref element, above, below, and those are displayed here, right? So now we are considering this example just to learn the relative locators, because if the ID is present, definitely you can use the ID to identify it. But just to learn the relative locators, let us use this very simple example. All right. Now, let's see how we can identify this particular element based on a relative locator above and correspond to the spatial position of this element with respect to rough element. So let's see how we can write the code. Okay, so take a look at here. Webdriver dot find element, and then you specify relative locator dot width, and then you specify by tag name, then button. So what does it mean? So the tag name has to be button. So for all of these elements, the tag names are button, right? So that could be any of the elements. So we are not uniquely identifying that, and then it's not complete. So after specifying the tag name, then you put a dot, and again you are adding the relative method, okay, that is above, and then here you specify by dot id button ref. So what is that? This button ref is this element, and for which the caption is ref element, that means this button, right? So above this element, so we specified that the identify an element with tag name button, that could be any of these 5, and then the button above the element which is above ref element. So that is this one. Only above is a possibility. So we can identify this one uniquely by specifying the relative locator above in this case. Now let's see the below relative locator. So it finds an element that's located below a specified element. So in this example, let's try to locate the button below, okay, with respect to another element, a rough element. Okay, so let's see how we can write code for that. Driver.find element, relative locator with by tag name button, that means could be any of these buttons, and then dot below by dot id rough element. So that means this one. Okay, so below this element, what is the possibility? It is only this button with caption below. Now let's see how we can identify an element with a relative locator to left of. So let's try to identify the button with caption left corresponding to the button rough element. Okay, so let's try to write the code. Driver.find element, relative locator with by tag name button. So that could be any of these buttons, and to the left of rough element. So this is the rough element. To the left of this, the only possibility is left of button. Now take a look at the to right of relative locator. Using that, let's try to identify this button with the caption right, corresponding to the position of rough element. So let's go back to the code. Driver dot find element, relative locator with by dot tag name, that means any of these button, and then to the right of by id rough element. So to the right of rough element button is a right button. Now let's try to find an element based on the locator near of. Okay, so let's try to find the element rough element. Okay, this button with respect to the position of left. Okay, this button. Okay, so how near works is it finds an element that's near to a specified element. Okay, so how the distance is measured? It's measured in pixels. So by default, the maximum distance it covers is 50 pixels. Okay, so if this button is within 50 pixels distance of the specified button left, then it will find rough element button. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. So it's driver.find element, relative locator with tag name button. So that could be any of these button, right? And then dot near by dot id button left. So near the element with id button left, that is this one, if there is any other element within 50 pixels distance, then that will be identified. So if ref element is within 50 pixels distance of this button, then that will be identified. Okay, so by default it is 50 pixels distance. So if you need to change the distance, you can do that as well. So you can specify a second argument, the number of pixels, if you want to change the distance from which it has to locate the element. In this case, in this example, we have specified 100. Okay, that means it will try to locate an element within 100 pixels. We can find the elements by chaining the relative locators as well. So for example, if we need to find this particular element based on this one and this one, we can do the chaining. So take a look at this code, relative locator dot with tag name button. So that could be any of these button, and then to the left of button ref. So that means to the left of this ref element button, and then we're specifying one more condition, dot below with id button above. So that means this button. So below this one and left of ref element. So that means left button.